I am Asa Winstanley. I'm the author of this book, Weaponizing Anti-Semitism, how the Israel lobby brought down Jeremy Corbyn. And we are really grateful and thankful that you've all come here today. We really appreciate it. So we've got some just short talks today for you, and the first speaker is Andrew Feinstein. He's a writer, he's a campaigner, and he's a former member of parliament in South Africa for the ANC. He's the author of The Shadow World, which is about the global arms trade, and he's also the author of After the Party, which is about corruption in South Africa. So he's just going to speak for a few minutes, and thank you all for coming. Here we go.
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to see so many comrades here, many of whom are not only part of the subject matter of Asa's book, but have suffered an enormous amount around this issue. And I've just driven down from Liverpool, where I was doing a Stop the War meeting last night, and sort of as I left the city, my route took me through Wavetree. So I sort of felt as though it was very symbolic that I was going from there to here. And I think the first thing we should do is congratulate and thank Asa for a truly remarkable book. And, you know, Edward Said said, he described the phenomenon of power repeating untruths until they have the force of truth. And what Asa's book does is it pushes back against that manufactured truth. When we think about what is happening in the occupied Palestinian territories, what has obviously been happening for decades, but what has been happening this year in particular, and also in the context of what has been happening in Ukraine and the sort of response to what has been happening in Ukraine, we've seen well over 200 murders, cold-blooded murders. And when I get up in the morning and I see online what has happened the night before in the occupied territories, I can't help but think back to Sharpeville, to Soweto, to Boipatong, to brutal, cold-blooded, racist murders. Now, can you imagine if the world's political leaders had remained silent in the aftermath of Sharpeville, Soweto, and Boipatong? Because that is what is happening today. There is not just silence, but there is an attempt to justify and to silence those who are being murdered, who are being oppressed. But I suppose we shouldn't be surprised, because of the intensity of the madness of our current moment. And I'm going to mention just a few things. So, according to my own constituency MP, Sir Keir Starmer, who has already been rewarded by the establishment, we are not allowed to call the Israeli government fascist, even though they proudly identify themselves as such. The person in Sir Keir Starmer's party, who features very prominently in the book, who used that awful phrase, effing racist and anti-Semite, The Guardian wouldn't even publish the story that that same MP who claims to be such a committed anti-racist benefited personally to the tune of millions and millions of pounds from her family company selling apartheid South African iron and steel to, amongst others, General Pinochet in Chile. The Guardian wouldn't even publish that, let alone the Labour Party consider the complaint that was lodged against her. And of course, my own constituency MP is delighted to expel people from his party, particularly Jewish people from his party, in order to combat anti-Semitism. That feels somewhat oxymoronic to me, to the point that I honestly believe that if Nelson Mandela was alive today and a member of Keir Starmer's Labour Party, he would be expelled for his views on Israel and on fighting racism. And while this is all happening, our government here, governments in Germany, the United States, and elsewhere, are trying to make any criticism of Israel illegal. So what do we need to do? What does this book demand that we do? That we speak out ever louder. That when laws are enacted, making illegal boycotts or criticism of Israel or anti-Zionism, that en masse we defy those laws. And that most importantly, we engage in something we're going to hear about in a little bit, in direct action and in boycott, divestment, and sanctions, because that is what ended apartheid in South Africa, and that is what will end apartheid and occupation in Palestine. So thank you. So finally, thank you, Asa, for giving us such a detailed, a precise, and an incredibly important corrective to the mendacious mainstream.
Thank you, Andrew. So next is Huda Ammori. Huda is British, Iraqi, and Palestinian. She's an activist. She is the co-founder of Palestine Action, which is a... I can see I don't need to tell you what it is. It's a direct action group which works against Israeli arms firms, especially Elbit, the drone maker. And you've shut down how many? Yeah. 8 to go. Well done. She takes Palestine Action takes direct action. They actually go onto the ground and they work hard to actually shut down these Israeli arms firms which are working in our country. And she's going to talk a little bit here. Here we go.
Hi everyone, it's so great to see so many people here and so many friends in the crowd as well, and thank you Asa for not only for doing this book but for your consistent work on uncovering the truth when many were too scared to do so. So truly thank you for all that you do. So I actually joined the Labour Party, as you can imagine, when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the party, and it was actually a bit of a change for me and a little bit strange in a sense, because it was only a decade before that it was the Labour Party who was leading this country into war in my mother's country. But with Jeremy Corbyn, we saw a chance for change, a vehicle for change, and there was hope. And specifically for me as a Palestinian and for many others, there was hope that under a Labour government with Jeremy Corbyn, that we could break Britain's complicity with the ongoing oppression of the Palestinian people, a complicity that's been going back for over 100 years and which every successive government has maintained. But shortly after that, I saw that all the conversations on Palestine were being dominated by these attacks and this weaponization of anti-Semitism. It was getting harder and harder to talk about Palestine without needing to defend yourself or defend your friends who are also being attacked. And I believe this is one of the ways it was designed to be. It was designed so that were forced in a position to react to their accusations and to distract us from what was happening in Palestine. And we saw this in 2018. We saw in Gaza, there were tens of thousands of Palestinians marching to the fence which had entrapped them under a brutal siege for over a decade. And they were met with live fire by Israeli snipers and weapons which were in part supplied by the British. And they were sniping down and killing unarmed protesters. And we saw that they would actually use bullets that were designed to explode on impact, so that the only way to treat the injury would be to amputate the limb. And they did this to a Palestinian footballer on the first day of these protests. And at the same time, in the Labour Party, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism was being passed. People were capitulating, and there was hardly any mention of the slaughter of the Palestinians that was going on in Gaza. There was no mention of it on the news, but anti-Semitism was everywhere. But even despite this, there was still hope. And I remember in 2019, which was the first time in British political history that an arms embargo, a motion for an arms embargo, two ways between here and Israel, was on the Labour Party manifesto for the first time. And that was incredible. I mean, I was absolutely elated to see that. But as we saw in 2019 with the general election, Corbyn was defeated, and those policies were nowhere near close now to ever coming into fruition. And I thank Asa for writing this book, because we can see clearly now all of what was happening behind the scenes to make sure that policies like that would never be able to come into this government and be made into reality through that process. That's why myself and so many others through different walks of life said, well, if you try and take away our voice, if you try and silence us, demonize us, harass us, then you can't stop us from using our own bodies to put them in the way of Israeli weapons manufacturers across this country, and that we will impose our own arms embargo on Israel. We will take direct action to shut down every single one of these weapons manufacturers operating across this country. No one should ever feel like they need to capitulate their solidarity with Palestine, and we will never capitulate that solidarity. If they shut us out of the political parties, we will go to the streets and we will resist, because the Palestinians are our brothers and sisters, and we stand with them throughout all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Huda. So our next speaker needs no introduction. He is Ken Loach. He is the creator, the director of two of my favorite films, The Wind That Shakes the Barley and Land and Freedom. Thank you for doing that. Ken Loach has done so much for all of us, and he's someone who's been a victim of this kind of weaponized anti-Semitism as well. So, you know, he's a successful filmmaker in his own right, and he doesn't need to do this kind of stuff, but he does. He has solidarity with people who need solidarity, and we appreciate him for that. So thank you for coming here tonight, Ken, and here we go.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Wow, this is a daunting audience. Many people here know far more about this than I do, so I'll press ahead. Asa, this is a fine book, and you're a fine journalist, and it's so timely, because there have been so many shallow, quick books written on this by right-wing writers, and you can go into Waterstones or any of the other, well, that's the only chain there is now. You go into there and you pick them up, and they are so shallow, trivial, and of course crow at the defeat of Jeremy. The great political sage David Baddiel is particularly notable for his casual, trivial version of the truth. And so thank God for Asa. I think it's important. Well, the two speeches we've heard, Andrew's clarity and Huda's passionate commitment, are very difficult to follow. But I think it's worth remembering a little bit the process that brought Jeremy down. When he was first elected, some of us said, well, we've just pushed the door open, just pushed it ajar. Now how can we really open the door and march through and manage to take power? And of course, very quickly, it was clear that the right-wing, the establishment, not the right-wing, the establishment would try to destroy him. Why? Because his program, and that of John McDonnell and those who supported him, although it was simply a move towards the 1945 post-war settlement, it didn't go as far as 1945, but it was a move in that direction. And that meant that the areas in which capital could make money were being circumscribed. They would not be able to make money out of the trains, obviously, or take the subsidies the government gave them. They would not be able to make so much money out of health, because that direction was going to change. They would not be making money out of energy and various other utilities, not making money out of water, and so on. The post office would come back to us. So the power of capital would be circumscribed, so the establishment would not accept that. The establishment would not accept a critical view of NATO, because Britain was seen as a central role, had a central role to play in NATO. If we were skeptical about the NATO agenda and didn't go along with that, that was something the establishment would not take. It would not take what Robin Cook called an ethical foreign policy. Look what happened to that. Respect for international law. Well, that meant condemning Blair's illegal war. It would have meant, as John put in the manifesto, declaring the state of Palestine. Couldn't have that. So there were many other reasons, apart from the criticism and attempt to reduce the power of Israel, that the establishment should attack him. But interestingly, of course, as we know, they chose the right wing of the Labour Party to destroy him. And that says everything we know about the Labour Party. Everything we know. And the Brexit was a difficulty, and who was the architect of the let's have another referendum, but Sir Keir caused total confusion, and Labour lost votes there. But the one that stuck, as Asa writes, was the anti-Semitism smear. And the Labour right wing were there every night with the collusion of the BBC and ITV, and led by The Guardian. Let's not forget that. Led by The Guardian. When The Guardian blew the whistle, the right wing, that was the signal, the right wing press can ride ahead with every smear, every lie, every dirty, sabotaging, vicious slander and libel against Jeremy. We felt the disgust. It was palpable. It turned our stomachs every day and made us angry. We couldn't get to sleep because we'd heard Margaret Hodge so often on Newsnight. She was treated like Dame Judy on the way to a ceremony. Fawned on. night after night. And we know the others. Wes Streeting, always there. And they were the ones used by the media to put in the boot, the smear. I think there were tactical errors, and I'm sure everybody would accept that now. We should have opposed it. They should have been answered frontally, the smears, immediately, with evidence. God, we had speakers here that could have trounced the opposition. That should have been done. Someone from Jewish Voice for Labour should have been with Jeremy every meeting he went to, every interview he went to, when he was raised. They could have spoken with authority, with clarity, with experience, and demolished the lie. That should have been done. But nevertheless, even if that had happened, it could well be that he would still, Jeremy's, as a person, would still have been destroyed. And that, the journalist, and I forget his name, everybody will know him, really good man, principled man, although he's not of the left, called it a political assassination. Indeed. Absolutely. But he called it a political assassination, and so it was. So that is now, I think, very clearly it was that. But to get these facts down, as Asa has done, and Chris Williamson also wrote a book, a very good book of his experience, and our failure to stand with those comrades who were the first ones over the trenches, shot down the early ones. We should have defended those absolutely far better than I'm afraid the leadership did. And good to see Jackie here, and I believe Mark is here as well. Yes, and Ken, absolutely. We share not only our initials, not only our first name, but also our birthday. Anyway, it happened. It happened. And it taught us so much about how the establishment, the deep state, will operate to destroy, personally destroy, people that they see stand against their deeper interests. And it's clear now that Starmer, he's not talking to the electorate. He doesn't care about the electorate. He doesn't care that he breaks every promise that he's ever given. He doesn't care that people turn away from him. It doesn't even matter that he's dull, banal, but ruthless. What matters is that after 13 years, and that's the number that recurs over and over again, after 13 years of Tory rule, you have to have a change of party to prove we're a democracy. And there he is. And the people who can make it happen are the ones, the owners of the press, the controllers of the BBC and ITV, the mass media, even our friends at The Guardian. And as long as Starmer satisfies them, they won't go for him, and he will win. And nothing will change. And we know nothing will change. I was in the Northeast day before yesterday, talking to people in the food banks there. And they are desperate. Desperate. They're just not getting enough food. People are starving. The people in desperate circumstances. People working but starving. He will not touch that. He won't touch that. And that's the price we're going to pay for this assault on Jeremy, the assault on democracy, the assault on hope. The assault on hope. So what do we do? What do we do? I think we've got to come together on the basis of our principles. We know that an election coming is going to be very tough for us for people to agree on who to vote for, because the left is fragmenting, which Starmer and co are relying on. They're relying on us fragmenting, and there are going to be so many different choices. But if we can unite on our principles, and we know it, don't need to spell them out to this group of comrades. We know what they are. We unite on our principles. We fight on those. If we unite across the left, as we did under Jeremy, when Jeremy was leader, he inspired that unity. We have to rediscover that on our principles and on our ideas. Unite under that, and then we'll have what Starmer most fears, which is a significant counter, someone who calls out the viciousness and the refusal to acknowledge the interests of the people. Anyway, well done, Asa. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Well, it's, as I said before, it's great to see so many of you here tonight. There's so many people here who could have spoken tonight. There's so many people here who feature in my book, and it's really great. This book was really difficult to get published. I started writing it in 2019. I mean, as probably a lot of you know, I was reporting on this issue since 2015, since Jeremy Corbyn first ran for the leadership of the Labour Party. And in 2019, I could see the way things were going, and I started writing this book. I started sitting down, collating a lot of my reporting, and putting this book together. But then it took me another 2 years to get this book published. So I went to all the publishers I could. I approached agents. You know, I got the Writers and Artists yearbook out. I just went through it. There was a lot of people that I approached to try and get this book published, but All Books was the only one that would. And it's a sign of the success, unfortunately, of the anti-Semitism smear campaign that I couldn't get a British publisher to publish this. So All Books, you know, its headquarters is in the United States. So, you know, that in itself tells you something. Nonetheless, All Books was the publisher to publish this. So I really want to thank all for that, and it's really something important. So my great hope is that the publication of this book can be the start of a conversation and a debate, and that we can learn the lessons of this period, that we can learn the lessons of the Jeremy Corbyn era, you could put it that way, that we can see what happened and we can learn the lessons of it. And that's why I've put it down in this book, and I hope that we can start to have that conversation. I don't want to, so many of us had so much hope in 2015. I can't describe the amount of hope that we all had. I wanted Jeremy Corbyn to succeed. I wanted to have a better future for this country, and for the world. I don't want, if there's another future Jeremy Corbyn figure, I don't want him to have to go through the same thing of being falsely maligned and smeared in this way. And so that's why I wrote this book. And I'm just really grateful that you've all come here tonight. It's so great to see so many friends and comrades here. And thank you.